All right, so today I want to talk about a story that I've talked about before. Not, I guess, a story. It's out of the Financial Post, and it was published on August 5th, and it's titled "Government is Why Housing in Canada is Unaffordable and More Taxes Won't Help." And again, this is exactly what I brought up in that more taxes, by definition, is only going to make housing more expensive. And this is why housing has gotten so expensive. It's because of the government. And I mean, I'm not going to read the whole thing about the article, but this article basically says the main two reasons is artificially restricting the housing supply and increasing housing costs through taxes and fees. And again, those are two of the many reasons. I think the other one too is that the government wants to prop up the net worth of boomers because they're the ones that own the most houses right now. And I mean, proposing any policy um, that would reduce housing costs would lose the votes of a lot of boomers, which is again the biggest voting group right now. It won't be forever, but it is for a decent little while right now. So um, that is the first thing. Like I say too, artificially restricting the supply too is a big thing. I mean, this is something that mainly goes on in cities. It's not really something that goes on in rural areas, which is another reason why you see houses in rural areas that are so much cheaper and in small towns because there isn't really any restrictions on housing. But the problem in cities, there's all these permits and there's only an X number amount of houses can be built in said areas and all this kind of stuff. And if there wasn't those restrictions, well, guess what? People would build more houses and the prices of housing would come down. And I mean, you look at this especially in Vancouver and Toronto. These are the biggest examples of it. And I mean, the other thing that they brought up here was development charges in the Greater Toronto Area had increased by up to 878% since 2004. Again, the reason why, or one of the main reasons why housing is so expensive is because of government rules and regulations. That's pretty much it. And I mean, there's many solutions to it. I mean, number one, massively need to deregulate. We need to lower taxes, and we need to stop propping up the values just to keep the net worths of boomers up. Like that's solution to it. And is it going to make some people mad? Yeah. But again, like the one thing that you really can't stand about a lot of these older people is that whenever they're talking about it, oh, we care about the children and the next generation, all that. Like, no, you don't. You only care about it. And I'm not saying this to everybody, but it's definitely a majority. They only care about it when if it doesn't affect them, yeah, of course they're going to do what's best for the children. But if it's something that benefits the children but doesn't benefit them, of course they're not going to vote for it, right? Because if they did, they would cut their pensions, right? And that's one of the many things that they would do. So again, it's just pure insanity. And this is something that really is affecting people nowadays. Like back in the day, you know, couple generations ago especially, you could afford a middle class house on the equivalent to like a 50, $60,000 a year salary. Nowadays that's next to impossible unless you have a lot of money signed up, or sorry, a lot of money saved up, or you have a cosigner, which again most people end up having to have a cosigner regardless because when you're young, again, it's hard to have a good credit rating, right? Too, that's the other problem. So, but if it was like back in the day, there wasn't massive regulations. I mean, you look at housing back in the day, like the 1950s, 1960s, you could buy a decent middle class house for, what, a couple years, 3 years at most salary. Like I've heard tons of stories like this. Nowadays, that's you're talking 7, 8, 10 years of salary before you can afford a middle class house. I mean, even more in some of these in the GTA and in Vancouver, you're talking probably 15 or 20 years. Again, like I don't know how people afford to live in some of these cities on a median income. Like I really don't. You're talking probably the majority of your earnings are just going towards your house or your rent. Like it's absolutely insane. And again, the reason why this kind of stuff happens is because of government rules and regulations. You hear all this talk now about banning foreigners from buying real estate in Vancouver, but it's too little too late. It's too little too late. Again, and this is the other problem too with government is they'll usually what they'll do is that they'll let a problem get completely out of control and then they'll implement the said solution when it's too little too late. That, and again, that's one of the many problems of government. And because the average person is not smart enough to recognize and perceive, future threats. The average person usually waits until it's too late to react, right? And that, again, that's just the folly of the average person, which again kind of sucks, but that's kind of reality. But again, um, housing should be a lot. I mean, number one, because of government rules, regulations, and just terrible government policy in general, median wages haven't gone up in like 2 decades. I think we're talking upwards of 25 years at this point. Um, and I mean, there's many reasons to that, too much to get into in this video. So that's one of the other many problems too, is that if government wouldn't have completely screwed over the next generation with all their terrible rules and regulations, then median income right now would be like 100 grand. But the reality is, I think it's like 60, give or take a little bit depending upon the area. So that is one of the other many problems too, is that the cost of housing has consistently gone up, and it's going up exponentially. I mean, it's the classic hockey stick scenario, but median incomes haven't gone up over the last couple decades, and it's completely screwing over the next generation. But because the next generation's been brainwashed by colleges and public schools and the mainstream media, all the average millennial and Gen Xers, oh, well, we need socialism. But no, that's just going to make the problem even worse, because the only way to do it is going to be to print massive amounts of money. So this is the problem with government and with the average person, is that um, their solution to the problem is always only going to make the problem worse. It appears like it's going to make it better, like all these kind of things, but the reality is that it doesn't. The less you tax people, the better you are off. The less you tax people, the better, because regardless of whether or not you tax people, it doesn't change anything. Like, I mean, it's the same thing with just taxes in general. What happens if you reduce taxes? I mean, I'm talking, just regular old taxes. Guess what? People earn more money. What do they do with that money? They either spend it, or they put it in the bank, or they invest it. Either way, society is still benefiting. The only difference is that the individual gets to make the decision where the money goes, not some government bureaucrat, which, if anything, taxing people less will do better, because people will spend money on where there's demand. Like, nobody is going and buying a old style box TV, but if the government decides, hey, we're going to subsidize old style box TVs, well, guess what? We're wasting a lot of money, and that is why taxing people more doesn't make any sense. It's the same thing with the whole housing scenario. It doesn't make any sense. And because there was such a backlash on this kind of stuff, the Trudeau government kind of backed off a little bit on it. But my guess is that they'll bring it back in some way, shape, or form, especially if they have a majority. Because if they don't have a majority, it's a little harder to do that kind of stuff. But um, yeah, that's basically what I wanted to talk about. And not to mention too, it's housing in the same kind of areas too. I mean, you look at these big liberal cities too. These are the ones where their housing has gone even the most out of control, partially because these are the cities that want and like the most immigration. That is another thing too that's driving up the cost of housing, because um, the immigration levels are too high compared to the amount of new housing and new apartment buildings and all that kind of stuff, because um, more people are coming in than there is to physically fit in the amount of buildings we have, which just drives up the costs. And the problem is that the left is just too ignorant to admit this kind of stuff, because it conflicts with their whole virtue signaling reality that housing costs could literally double overnight because of immigration, and it would still never get the left to question immigration. And that's one of the other many problems that kind of make things insane. So anyway, I just wanted to talk about this because this is another complete fallacy that I hear all the time, that oh, housing is expensive because of the greedy capitalists, we're just wanting more. No, that the housing is not expensive because of that. Housing is expensive because of government rules and regulations. And if there's so much money to be made, then why don't you get into the business again? The reality is that, yeah, there's some money to be made, but the main reason why there's money to be made is because of the government, not because of the evil free market. So anyway, that's kind of the last thing I wanted to bring up. So if you liked the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you check me out on those other platforms. All those links are in the descriptions. You can find them all there. And last thing, stay tuned for more.